Capital. It will define our future economy. But what is it? Well, capital is all the engines, factories, computers, trucks, ovens, and other machines and tools businessmen buy to make other things. They didn't exist in any real number until the steam engine in 1820. But capital really took off in 1920 with electricity and the internal combustion engine. As late as 1920, it took 40% of us just to grow the food that we needed. Today, it only takes 3%. Because machines make us so productive, our economy began being able to produce huge quantities of luxury goods. In fact, we had to produce many luxury goods to keep us all employed. The economy was making an epic shift. Two signs defined this shift: the Great Depression and the massive World War II economy. Because our nation relied so heavily on the demand for luxury goods in the 20s, economic downturns could become steep and could snowball to collapse, since every unemployed worker was a customer without an income. It surprised me to discover that in 1934, Albert Einstein wrote this: "As I see it, this crisis, the Great Depression, differs in character from past crises in that it is based on an entirely new set of conditions due to the rapid progress in the method of production. Only a fraction of the available human labor in the world is needed for the production of the total amount of consumption goods necessary to life." Although financial distress and credit were the triggers, they disguised the underlying shift in the economy, from being a system of managing scarce resources, as it had been for all of world history, to being a system of managing consumer demand. Hyper-capitalism, or an economy defined by capital, made our true economic capacity enormous. It was now the job of government to try and maintain strong enough consumer demand by making sure people had money to buy all the economy could produce at full employment. World War II removed any doubt. The war pushed us to produce far more than consumers could ever demand. We thought the economy could jump by 30%. But it didn't. It actually more than doubled. We pulled obsolete machines out of retirement. We worked them around the clock until they fell apart. But in World War I, we struggled to feed everyone and fight the war. That means this big evolution really took off between World War I and World War II. Now think about it this way. In World War II, our war-fighting capability started to be measured by our machines and how many we could build, tanks and planes and ships, not like World War I and before, where we measured the number of soldiers that we have. Our economy was the same way. We began to measure it by factories, trucks, locomotives, and tools, not in the number of workers that we have. If economics was all about number of people, the Chinese economy today would be 4 times our size. Instead, they're about 1/3 our size. I mean, that's right. Nobody believes it, but they just don't have the machines that we have in the United States. Well, so what, you might say? Why does that redefine anything? Well, it should have caused people to think like Einstein, way out into the future. But think about this. One person using a $1 billion machine can make 100 cars per day. The selling price of those 100 cars, say $2 million, will go almost entirely to the machine owners. You can't give $2 million per day to the one worker, and more than that, to keep the economy spinning, expect him to turn around and spend his $2 million paycheck every day. The entire economy will eventually look like that. Very few jobs, machines and computers doing most of the work, and most of the money going into the pockets of the owners. Look at Redbox replacing Blockbuster. It's going on all around you. Even when new businesses spring up, they are designed to reduce jobs, not create them. Now, these machines wouldn't be an economic problem at all if everybody shared in the ownership, which is the same as stock in the stock market. But because of the economic collapse in the 1930s and the push to consume in the 50s and 60s, families didn't buy much stock. So as our economy evolved and more income started going to the machine owners, income began flowing more and more strongly towards a small percentage of wealthy Americans that owned, rather than the cross-section of America. The money that gets spent slowly drops, since these wealthy Americans don't consume dollar for dollar like everyone else. They get a little bit more as a group every year, so a little bit less gets spent. We can't rely forever on labor income to put money in consumers' pockets to drive an economy that eventually won't really need much labor. Remember, we can't build an economy where one person can make 100 cars per day and expect everyone to have a job. The cars and other consumer goods will pile up to the sky in a big hurry if every worker was that productive. That's just too much output. In the future, we'll all have to inherit a large stock portfolio, a piece of the economic machine like the richest 3% do now. If it's okay for them, it will be okay for everyone. Now, we're not even close to that yet, but the question is, are we way behind on our preparations for this new economy? Well, we wouldn't be if all the stock buying in the 1920s would have worked. Everybody today would have a decent inheritance. If ownership of the machines was spread around evenly, and it could have been, today every family of 4 could have at least $500,000 invested. Enough so that we could all fall back on the returns of our investments if we couldn't find a job or we wanted to go back to school. There would be no more need for the 2-job family or need for government programs or unemployment. Our investments could help us be self-sufficient, a lot less need for government. But not only did the market crash wipe most people out in 1930, but it scared families for generations. So America became a bunch of spending laborers right at the very time they needed to be big investors. Well, here's the third sign that we're in a hyper-capitalist economy. Supersized government had to appear to give people entitlements and paychecks to keep the economy going since they had so few investments. The government now employs almost 40% of us, and there is still 10% unemployment. And there are no new mousetrap factories springing up to hire the 10% that are unemployed. In fact, new business models like Amazon are designed to reduce jobs. Now remember, machines are terrific. The problem isn't what these machines can do. The problem is the money we spend as a society unfortunately depends mostly on how much labor wages we have as a country. A fluke situation caused by the decisions of our relatives not to invest. And the machines are making wages as a whole go down a little bit more each year. Labor wages buy most of the things that are bought. And in a situation where labor is shrinking, our answer has been let the government hire. And that is a very bad solution. But things didn't have to turn out like this, with the ownership of all the machines concentrated in the hands of so few. But they did. It can't continue like this. We're headed for a capital-centered economy, or a machine economy. Very few people needed to make all that we can consume. We can't consume more because our wages won't give us enough to buy all that the economy can produce. Now that's a fact. Now let me repeat that. The earnings in the future economy will be centered on ownership of the machines and computers, not jobs. Get the income from ownership to everyone and consumers can buy more. The system will be set up to work out into the automated future. If you don't spread around ownership so people can have incomes, you will end up with a government that keeps hiring to make up for job losses to keep the economy going. That's socialism. Government hiring people and deciding what is produced, how, and for whom. Then you end up with all the bad things that cause socialism to fail. Now that seems weird, I know. The future must involve a government fix in the free market to prevent creeping socialism, which is quietly growing in our free market super economy because of all this government hiring. But think about the opposite just for a second. If the government reversed itself tomorrow and fired 32% of the workforce to get back to those 1910 levels of 8% government, do you think products would magically appear so these people could get jobs making new things? We have 10% unemployment now. Where are the products that should be springing up to hire that 10%? Well, anyway, you might say taxes would go down if you fire all those people because government would be smaller. But that would be wrong too. Right now, we're not even using taxes to pay for government. We're using debt. That's the issue most people who want to cut government miss altogether. The government got to this size because people needed jobs, not just because some social service was needed. Our parents spent their paychecks rather than buying stock, and here we are today. heading into a heavily automated world where capital ownership will be king and only 3% of the population owns everything. Now that's a problem, but it can be fixed. Now we can spread around that ownership and prepare for the automated economy. Not Robin Hood, we don't have to steal it or tax it from them, but something much better. Now for a lot of reasons, the government is adding money to the money supply. But because interest rates are so low, nobody wants to lend it out. The system is stalled. The next time the government does a quantitative easing, QE3, if the government bought equities, stock, capital in the stock market, the government will be buying automation on behalf of everyone. They could pass the benefits down to everyone by collecting fewer taxes at first and stopping the debt from going higher. In the not-so-distant future, the government could pay a reverse tax to citizens by virtue of owning shares of the automated world, getting dividends, and passing it out. With ownership spread around, the economy roars higher. Incomes go up, so consumption goes up. At the same time, wages go up because labor supply would diminish. The need for the two-job family would disappear. The stock market would go up, benefiting the rich and the general public. The government could modulate its stock purchases to even out market movements. Our sovereign wealth fund could buy some foreign securities to offset the effect of outsourcing. Automated startup companies like Redbox and Amazon that reduce jobs would attract government investing, which would spread the benefits of these evolutions to the general public. Now the problem we have to remember is the labor class of previous generations didn't save, and today we're never going to earn enough to fix this problem without help. 401ks are not nearly enough. They aren't even enough to retire on, let alone creating some generational legacy to solve this ownership problem. No, we have to build a fix that will democratize ownership of capital sooner rather than later, and relying on savings is a solution doomed to undershoot any realistic goals. Expanding the money supply by buying non-voting equities on behalf of everyone is a win-win-win-win solution. In conclusion, our government thinks that they are managing the economy by smoothing out the dangerous swings in a luxury-driven, capital-intensive economy that is prone to snowball and collapse. But they are missing the big evolution that is taking place in economics, the shift from a labor-centered economy to an owner-centered economy. Advances in machinery and computers are causing this shift. It's like the effect gunpowder had on war. It's big. It started in 1820, took off in 1920, defined by collapse in 1930, demonstrated by the power of the hyper-capital economy in World War II, and now we're missing the trend towards the future. Lots of machines, fewer and fewer jobs, permanent and growing unemployment, and a perpetually shrinking economy if we can't find a way to supplement people's labor incomes. And worse, the government unintentionally creating jobs and entitlements to make up for it, taking us towards socialism. We're still in the cocoon phase of this evolution. The labor middle economy of the late 21st century will be our heaven if we all own capital, or our hell if we all need jobs.